Hi, Sean here, one half of Sean and Kiara. We are the co-creators of Lucy in the Sky, a graphic novel for middle grade readers published by First Second. Our second graphic novel, Rhiannon, will be out in October of 2025. If you like the things we do, please consider supporting us by becoming a paying member of our Patreon site for $4 a month. And if you enjoy videos like this, hit the like and subscribe buttons, as it'll help us build this channel. Thank you, and enjoy the video. So the next day, now we have our Thompson and Thompson appearance. And they kind of take a back seat in these adventures this time around. They don't have such a prominent role as they did especially in Red Rackham's Treasure. But we have to include them somehow, so they're mixed up in the investigation of these sicknesses that are taking place, beginning with Peter Clarkson, the photographer. And then we learn in the newspaper that Sanders Hardiman, who is the head of the expedition, has also taken ill. So the Thompsons are investigating it, and they reveal to Tintin some essential information about the investigation, that these glass fragments were found, or these pieces of crystal were found at the scene of each of the mysterious illnesses, and they're being analyzed by the police lab. They call up the police lab to see if anything has been found out about them, and we learn that the crystal fragments seem to come from little crystal balls that contain some sort of substance, but we're not sure exactly what the substance is yet. There's another gag was sort of mix-up kind of gag where Thompson is in a state of confusion. His mind is somewhere else, and he doesn't realize what he's doing, and so instead of hanging up the phone, he hangs up his walking stick, and he has the phone hooked around his arm instead of his walking stick. And so this would have been a great panel just on its own, but Herge continues it into the next sequence. We still see he still has the phone hooked on his arm while he's trying to make another phone call using his cane, and he doesn't realize why he can't get through. There's no signal. The telephone must be out of order until Tintin points out that he's got the receiver of the phone hooked on his arm. It's a great example of, you would have had to have used some reference to come up with a scene like this. And this is the perfect sort of study that this explorer Falconer would have had, with all his artifacts from his various travels, and even the distinctive shape of the fireplace there, and the fabric of the upholstery on his chairs. I mean, you can't think this stuff up in your head. Clearly Herge would have used some reference to outfit this room, and it just works great. It's very convincing. So this explorer Falconer has been told the fate of some of his colleagues, and he goes to get a taxi to go see Tintin. Tintin is calling up the other members of the expedition, one of whom is Professor Cantineau, and Tintin is delighted to have found that Cantineau is still okay. Professor Cantineau is from another return character. So we have Castafiore and General Alcazar, and now we see Professor Cantineau. So Herge is bringing back a lot of these past characters, which he will continue to do so. And Cantineau was part of the expedition in the Shooting Star, if you remember from that episode when I did that volume. And we also know from that adventure that he is a French professor, which would make sense for him to be in town here in Brussels. And just as he has him on the phone, we hear that something has happened to Professor Cantineau, and we see that a brick has come through the window, and there's some glass shattered here, and the professor is unconscious. So as Tintin rushes down to hurry out he's going to try to warn one of the other members of the expedition, Dr. Midge, who is the director of the Darwin Museum. He encounters Falconer's cab come up, and as he opens the door, he sees that Falconer is unconscious in the cab. Even the driver does not realize this, and they see that crystal fragments on the floor of the car. He asks the driver if anything weird has happened. He realizes that when they were at a stoplight, another taxi had drawn up alongside, and he remembers hearing some breaking glass sound. Off Tintin goes to the Darwin Museum. It's called the Darwin Museum here in the English version, which would make sense, Darwin being an English scientist. And the sign on the building is pretty rough. In the original, it has a different name. Yeah. Actually, the sign on the French version is not that better drawn than in the English version, now that I look at it. And Dr. Midge in this version is not named Midge, but Hornet or Hornet. So we have two names of insects, Midge and Hornet. Which makes sense because Dr. Midge gets a butterfly for his collection, is delivered. And we see that as the delivery person comes up, that one of the Thompsons is guarding Dr. Midge's his office. And he warns Midge not to open the package, that he will take the danger himself, and he calls the other Thompson, who is guarding the window outside, to come in as they look at the package. And they open it up as they're shaking as they open it up, and they find that it is just a harmless butterfly. Tintin comes and asks them, well, what are they doing? Who's guarding Dr. Midge? And they say, well, we are. Who's outside the window? Well, I am. Well, why are you in here? And they hear the sound of glass breaking. They go in to find that same thing has happened to Dr. Midge as Professor Cantineau. And while Thompson should have been guarding the window, something has come through the window, and Dr. Midge is unconscious. So more and more members of the expedition are falling into the mysterious sickness, these comas that they're falling into. We have another encounter between Snowy and the Siamese cat. This time the cat has got the upper hand on Snowy. There's another sequence where, part of the humor, Captain Haddock, is he's constantly being annoyed by Professor Calculus, although he loves him dearly, and they live together in Marlinspike. They're dear friends now. His deafness, Professor Calculus's deafness, is a source of frustration and annoyance for Captain Haddock. So he's trying to tell Professor Calculus, as Calculus is fooling around with his pendulum again, what he's been reading in the newspaper. And of course, Calculus cannot understand what he's saying. And finally, in frustration, he says, here, read it yourself. It's simpler that way. And Calculus says, well, have you read that? Have you read this? No? Well, I'm surprised. The headlines are printed quite large. Never mind, I'll read it to you myself. And he begins reading the story to Haddock that Haddock has been trying to tell him about. The look on his face. And while he's reading it, he goes to see who's at the door. He greets Tintin, brings him up. He says, and how's Professor Calculus? Well, he's busy reading the paper to me. You see, he's still reading the paper, thinking that Captain Haddock is still there. He gets to the end of the article, and he realizes that one of the members of the expedition is an old colleague of his, Professor Tarragon. They were students together. So they decide to all go out to see Professor Tarragon. They arrive at his his chateau, his mansion, to find it heavily guarded. Guards posted at the gate. They go in, another great interior, little details. And we see Tarragon is actually a giant of a man. His first name in the English version is Hercules. And we see that he's old friends with Professor Calculus. He said, well, dear old Cuthbert. And as he shakes Captain Haddock's hand, he's got a firm handshake. Leaves them both in pain as he shakes their hand, and Haddock's monocle falls out. Once he's still trying to keep the monocle in his eye. And we see that Professor Tarragon actually is the keeper of the mummy that the expedition has brought back. So we see the mummy of Raskar Kapak, the Inca whose tomb they raided. There's a storm brewing outside, and you realize that they might want to stay the night, so Professor Tarragon invites Captain Haddock to put his car in the garage. And they hear some shouts from outside. They look out the window to see one of the guards running to see what are these shots coming from. Tintin runs out as well, and they realize that the summer heat has popped the tires of the captain's car, so they really are stuck now for the night until they can get a breakdown crew to come out to repair it. The wind of the summer storm blows the shutters into Captain Haddock's face. Another great gag. I mean, the humor he just continues the humor, gag after gag. As we hear these bangs, the bang of the shutter, the bang of the tires being popped, the thunder, and Professor Calculus says, "Excuse me, Hercules, but I think there's someone knocking at the door." And so we get the storm. And as they're settling in for the evening, and Professor Tarragon is telling them about their finding Raskar Kapak's tomb and showing them a translation of an inscription that was carved on the wall of the tomb. And we read here the translation that he's made. "After many moons will come 7 strangers with pale faces who will profane the sacred dwellings of he who unleashes the fire of heaven. Those vandals will carry the body of the Inca to their own far country, but the curse of the gods will be as their shadow and pursue them over land and sea." Seems to be foreshadowing everything that's happening here. He says, yes, but read the next bit. And before he can do so, crack, we see some lightning seem to strike the house, but come down through the chimney, somehow a little lightning ball. Comes down through the chimney and whizzes throughout the room, coming right at them, knocks Professor Tarragon over, shreds his clothing, chases Snowy into the fireplace, before then circling around Professor Calculus's chair, raising him up into the air, setting him down on the table, finally smashing into the tomb, or the glass case where the mummy is kept, completely vaporizing the mummy. It's an extraordinary scene here. I always wondered how how a lightning ball could come down through a chimney and do all of this. And of course, this is the cover illustration. So one of the eerier supernatural aspects of the story. And we see after all this has happened, Tarragon is now in a kind of a demoralized state. He says, read the rest of the translation. So he does. "There will come a day when Raskar Kapak will bring down upon himself the cleansing fire, and in one moment of flame he will return to his true element. On that day will punishment descend upon the desecrators. It's a very ominous warning, seems to be coming true, and Professor Tarragon says the prophecy is fulfilled. Raskar Kapak is gone, and I am struck down by his curse. I can feel it. Tintin says, don't worry, we're well guarded here. So comes back to his senses, or he seems to, and they go to bed for the night. So it's another great sequence here. So when you read this, it looks as if this is really happening. The mummy is coming through the window into Tintin's room. Tintin's having a nightmare, the look on his face. Carrying a crystal ball, the mummy throws the crystal ball down onto the floor, shattering it. As Tintin wakes, he realizes that he's been dreaming it. I mentioned before, Herge is great at these dream sequences. I mean, he really does them effectively. And here, again, this is such a kind of a scary sequence, a very eerie and unsettling sequence, the way that the mummy is drawn and everything. So he uses these sort of scary elements very sparingly, and in doing so, they're very effective. And as the others begin to wake up, we see that they've all had the same dream. So they go running to see if Professor Tarragon is all right. And another excuse for some physical comedy. Captain Haddock falling down the stairs, getting knocked in the head by his flower pot. So they break down the door to Tarragon's room. They find that he's still asleep in his bed, but as they walk into the room, they find the crunch, crunch, crunch of the crystal fragments on the floor, and they realize that he has now become victim to the Inca's curse. And of course, they cannot wake him. The guards ask each other if they've seen anyone. No one has gotten through. Tintin realizes that the jewels have been stolen from Raskar Kapak's display case, the mummy's display case. And Tintin begins barking up the chimney. They realize this is how the attacker has... This is where the attacker has come and gone, and perhaps he's still up there. And as Tintin is looking up, you see the attacker is still in the chimney, and some soot and ash come down. This is another one of those gags that always makes me think. Every time I see this gag, there's a common gag to use where somebody has just gotten a face full of soot, and we see their faces completely blacked out with their white eyes. It always leaves me feeling that there's some sort of racist aftertaste to this kind of gag, sort of recalling blackface. And we see the attacker is still trying to make his way away. One of the guards shoots out the window. They cannot find him. They hurry back in to find that Professor Tarragon is awake, and he's in the midst of some sort of fit. He doesn't seem to see Tintin or Captain Haddock, but he's seeing something else that he's dreaming or having a nightmare about, and then he falls back asleep again, or into his coma. And the next day, Professor Calculus is out on the grounds of Tarragon's mansion using his pendulum, and it begins swinging rather rapidly. So he follows where the pendulum seems to be taking him, loses his glasses along the way. And then what does he find? He finds something down here in the bushes. It's a bracelet, and he realizes it's one of the bracelets that the mummy had on. So he puts it on, and he continues on his way. Tintin and Captain Haddock realize later that the professor is gone. They go out looking for him. They cannot find him. He's not responding to his calls, which is is not surprising. Tintin even says it's no good shouting for him. And then they see a bloody handprint on the tree. And they realize that the attacker might have been wounded during the night and sought refuge in the tree. So Tintin decides to go up and look for him in the tree. They find Professor Calculus's umbrella. Some grass has been trampled down, more clues that there's been a fight. They put 2 and 2 together that maybe the attacker has taken Calculus, abducted him and taken him prisoner. Finally, from one of the little outbuildings on the estate, somebody starts shooting at them. The attacker is still there. Snowy takes the opportunity to dodge the bullets to grab a bone. Tintin manages to sneak up on the door where the gun is being held out of the little window here, and knocks the gun out. And as they force the door, they realize that the attacker has escaped out the other way and is gone now in the car that has been waiting for him. So now they're on a chase. They realize that the attacker has taken Professor Calculus, and they call the police to give chase. They give a description of the car. And here, again, the place names. From Harlesford, we have English-sounding place names, but the uniforms of the police, these are not English policemen. These are Belgian uniforms that we see here. And they're stopping the cars as they go through, but no sign of Professor Calculus. So the police realize that the car that they're looking for is not the car that the villains set out in originally, the black car, but they've switched cars somewhere along the line for a fawn-colored car. And of course, this is the one that the police have let through. Tintin and Haddock go out to investigate, and they find the black car. The original car has been abandoned, and there are traces on the tree. Tintin finds traces of fawn-colored paint on the tree, and evidence that there have been several cars here, tire tracks on the ground. They realize that the villains have switched cars and have gotten away. So they seem to be at the end of their trail. The next morning, Tintin's reading the newspaper, and he reads that the occupants are believed to be of the Fawn saloon car that they were chasing. The occupants are believed to be of South American origin. He gets a call from Thompson & Thompson that he better come around to the hospital. Something strange is happening to the members of the expedition. And we learn that at a certain time every day, I think it's at 10:30, every day, the 7 patients, the 7 members of the expedition, all come out of their coma and start writhing around in this fit that they seem to have every day. The doctors are in there studying it. They can't seem to figure out what is happening, what has caused the coma, what is causing these seizures to take place at the same time every day. And it's at this point in the story that the original serialization of the story in Le Soir ended. Belgium was liberated by the Allies, and publication of Le Soir as a Nazi propaganda tool ceased, and Herge began having troubles of his own. So with the occupation lifted and Belgium being liberated, Of course, now Herge and anybody associated with Le Soir, or any journalist or anybody who worked for a Nazi-controlled newspaper or publication during the occupation, was now considered to be a collaborator with the Nazis and a traitor. And Herge, during the ensuing years, which he tried to clear his name, I believe he was arrested 4 times by 4 different groups operating in Belgium as Belgium tried to reorganize itself again after the occupation. And he eventually gets cleared and gets a certificate of good citizenship. But there was an interval of 2 years where the story sort of languished, unfinished. And this is the point where the story stops before it gets picked up again later on. And what happened was Herge is seen as a collaborator, and it's not until another person by the name of Raymond Leblanc comes along. And Leblanc was a member of one of the resistance organizations that fought against the Nazis during the war, and Leblanc had resistance credentials as a resistance fighter. He was well known, but he was also a big fan of Herge. He, as a child, he was a fan of Tintin, and he enjoyed the fact that the Tintin continued to be published during the war. He thought that it kept the morale of the Belgian people up. That the character Tintin was an important part of their culture, and he thought that Herge was doing something good by keeping the Tintin adventures running. And so he came to Herge's rescue and championed him and his work, and eventually offered to set Herge up in his own magazine as Leblanc as publisher. And together they created Tintin magazine, which then began serializing the adventures of Tintin once more, this time on a weekly basis, as they had been done in Le Petit 21, but this time in full color. And so the story continued, this time now in Tintin magazine, which would go on to be one of the leading comics magazines in Belgium and in Europe. And also the sort of the home of the clear line style that Herge had pioneered and perfected in this and other of the stories. It was also where Edgar P. Jacobs would go on to draw his Blake and Mortimer series, would be serialized in Tintin magazine as well. So here this is where he restarts the adventure, and again, it's sort of a symbolic restarting. Tintin is once again, same shot of him walking towards Marlinspike, and he sees Captain Haddock is really in low spirits. He gets a phone call, though, which seems to agitate him. He gets some news. We don't know what it is yet, so he heads off without answering Tintin what's going on. Knocking on the door, what's he doing in there? And he comes out, and now we have Captain Haddock back. Or the Captain Haddock that we are familiar with, the old Captain Haddock in his sailor's outfit and his rucksack on his back. He's ready to head out on a new adventure. He said, well, let's go where, Captain? He says, well, first there's time for a drink before we head off. Another 3/4 of a page devoted to a gag, Snowy getting caught up in a suit of armor, stumbling down the stairs of Marlinspike with the helmet on his head. Meanwhile, Captain Haddock is having his drink of whiskey. He goes over to toast a portrait of Calculus. Here's to you, Cuthbert, old chap. We'll find you, I promise, dead or alive. And Cuthbert Calculus seems to come out of the painting, as I've told you before, more to the west. So this is a callback to his dowsing pendulum. He was always telling Captain Haddock and Red Rackham's treasure that they need to go more to the west to find Red Rackham's treasure. And Haddock thinks it must be the booze. So he drops the whiskey out the window into a water bucket. Snowy goes to drink out of the bucket. This is what I call water. He ends up tipsy. As we've seen before, one of Snowy's things is his penchant for alcohol. So Haddock has been tipped off that that the car they're looking for has been seen in a port town called Westermouth. In the French language version, they're not going to Westermouth, they're going to an actual port, Saint-Nazaire, I believe. Let's see, where is it? Saint-Nazaire. Yeah. And here in the English version, they've changed it to Westmouth, much more English sounding, sort of like Portsmouth. Changed the sign as well. Another another 3/4 of a page devoted to a gag where it stops raining, and then by the time they get the convertible hood up, the rain is stopped with a nice rainbow in the sky. Haddock is soaking wet. He wrings out, as he's wringing out his clothes, another car comes by and soaks him. So they get to Westermouth and talk to the inspector there. But still no leads. And until he gets a call, they find that the car they're looking for has been pulled out of the water at the docks. And again, we see here these are French gendarme uniforms, not English police uniforms. So they're in Saint-Nazaire, I guess is in France. I'll have to check that. And because I believe this is a real town that Herge went and, or at least his partners went to do sketches of to get the detail right. And we find as they're at the docks there, Tintin spots somebody. He goes running off, and who is it? It's General Alcazar. He's going back home. His music hall career is finished. His partner, the Indian Chiquito, who is helping him, has disappeared, and we learn that Chiquito is actually Quichua Indian, a descendant of the Incas, the ancient Incas. His real name is Rupak Inca Huaco. Tintin learns this, and it intrigues him. Could he be involved in all of this that's been going on? So they say their goodbyes, and we seem to be stuck again at a dead end. Another great panel here where Haddock is sitting on a bale on the docks, and as Tintin is lost in thought, we say, "Hey, whoa, stop," from up above, and we see that nice half-page panel here. Haddock is stuck as a crane is lifting up the bale. So they seem to be at a dead end, but then Tintin suggests that they go and they look up their Captain Haddock's friend, Captain Chester, who is the captain of the ship Sirius. Chester, we first meet in the Shooting Star and his ship, the Sirius, and then again, the Sirius is used in Red Rackham's treasure as the ship that Tintin and Haddock take to find Red Rackham's treasure. His ship is lying at Bridgeport. You said so yesterday. So he suggests that they go to pay him a visit. So on they go to Bridgeport. They find that the Sirius has sailed already. So now they're sort of in low spirits. And as Captain Haddock goes to kick a hat lying on the ground, he finds that somebody has played a trick by sticking a brick under the hat, waiting for somebody to kick it to injure his foot. And we see the culprits back here, a couple of street urchins. Tintin points them out, and Haddock is about ready to throw a brick at them when Tintin holds him back from doing so. He tosses the brick over the side and ends up hitting somebody on the head down below. Then Snowy brings the hat back, and Tintin says, "What are you doing with this dirty old hat? Let it go." He throws it away again. Snowy brings it back once more. Tintin throws it into the water. But Snowy is determined to get the hat, and Tintin does not know why. He even jumps into the water to bring it back. And then he looks inside the hat. He realizes something startling. Inside the hat is the initial CC. They realize that they recognize the hat finally. They recognize it as Professor Calculus's hat, and that the CC stands for Cuthbert Calculus. So they realize that Calculus and his abductors must have come here. So they go to find the children, the two boys. They go to ask the two boys where they found the hat. They said they were down by the number 17 shed this morning. Crates were being loaded aboard a ship called the Black Cat, and when they lifted one of the crates, we saw it underneath. So Tintin and Haddock go to ask the harbor master if there was a ship docked next to opposite shed number 17, and they find that there was, in fact, a ship, a Peruvian merchantman called the Pachacamac, arrived from Callao, and it was docked there and set sailed right at the time when Calculus and his abductors would have been there. So they realized that that Calculus and his abductors have gone aboard that ship, and they are now bound for Peru. And we end the story there, and we have our setup for the next adventure, which will take us to Peru and to the mystery of the Incan mummy, as we find out what is behind the mysterious illness of the explorers and where the abductors have taken Calculus and for what reason. And as Tintin and Haddock fly off on their plane, bound for Peru, we see Nestor running to try to catch up. He's too late, he just misses them. And he realizes that Captain Haddock has left without a single spare monocle. And so there we end the 7 crystal balls, and next time we'll take a look at the Prisoners of the Sun and find out how this adventure shapes up. Thank you for joining me, and see you next time.